A large software company in the cloud storage space was facing declining sales and brought in new leadership to address the challenge. The new management made changes to sales compensation in order to reduce costs, which angered the sales staff and caused many of the very experienced senior sales account executives to quit. As more customers continued to leave for competitors, the company scrambled to understand why. They deployed new salespeople and equipped them with deep discounts to win back customers, but still did not see much improvement. Churn continued to be a big problem. After conducting a lot of customer interviews, they discovered many of their strategic accounts had complained to support and customer success about high turnover. Customers felt they had no stable contact to work with on their sales needs, causing them to evaluate and even switch to competing solutions. If the company had ThunderAct, they would have been able to identify sales turnover as a trending issue before it becomes a huge problem. B2B customers like to have someone they trust working with them, and they felt like they were always getting handed over to someone new. When the majority of the sales team left, it was the last straw for many of this company's clients. No number of discounts were going to win them back. Visit ThunderAct.com to start a free trial.
All right, next up, we've got a fireside chat with Michael and Moshe. Whenever you're ready, guys.
Hey everybody. All right. Moshe, you have your camera on yet?
Yes.
There you are.
Hey.
Yeah. So I appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. I'm going to apologize for looking like more of a grizzly bear than a human being. But so as you all know, that Moshe is the COO at Applitools. So we're going to go through a couple different questions with him today and learn about sort of pivots that they're making and that sort of thing during this time. So just to start us off, could you give us like an elevator pitch for Applitools?
Yeah, sure. So first, thanks for inviting me. Glad to be here. And so Applitools, what we do, we help companies make sure that their digital experience of their end user is visually perfect across all their digital channels. Users can access their platforms from different devices, browsers, screen sizes, and we're helping them make sure that in every interaction that a user has with the brand, they have a great user experience and there are no regressions, no issues that slip into production. What's nice about it is that now, especially now with the COVID situation, like all the companies are going online, are going digital. So we have customers, we have over 400 customers across different industries. All the big tech companies are using it. Most of the large banks are using it, pharmaceutical companies, even car manufacturers. We have customers like Tesla and McLaren. So it's becoming a really important focus for almost every company.
Okay. I just realized that you had set your background to a fireplace.
Yeah, I have to.
I appreciate that. Keeping the theme of the fireside chat. Yeah. Would you mind telling us about the relative size and the composition of the various departments? Like how big's the sales team? How big's the customer success team? What are those roles like?
Yeah, sure. So we're still a small team. We have about 90 employees in the company. We have about 35 people in engineering and product. We have about 25 people on the sales team, about sales and business development and sales engineering. We have about 15 in customer success, customer support, and the rest are in marketing, HR, G&A. So that's the composition.
Okay. So what kind of tools does your team utilize on a day-to-day basis, like for the sales team and the customer success team? And the second part to that is, are there any of those that you've found surprising value from, aside from the standard stuff like Salesforce and Gainsight?
Yeah. So obviously we're using the standard tools like Salesforce and Marketo and a bunch of others, kind of like tip outreach, all these usual tools. I think some tools which we're seeing unique value from, or like one of the tools that I'm a big fan of is Gong. We started using Gong about a year ago, and this really helps us get insights about how our sales team is doing, how the interaction with the customers is coming along, what typical objections are coming up in customer calls, what competitors are mentioned on a regular basis, so we can make sure that we have the right battle cards against this competitor. So it's really gives you a full visibility on everything that's happening in the field, collect the feedback from the customers, and especially now when we're making more frequent changes to our messaging and pricing and packaging, it really helps you get visibility of how well the sales team is adopting it. And when we're like much smaller and we had just a few sales guys, it was easy. I mean, you just do a quick meeting and everyone are on the same page and you join many of the meetings. But now that the sales team is bigger with people in different countries, some people in Australia, some people in Europe, some people in the US, it's more difficult to constantly monitor it. So this tool gives us great visibility.
Okay, yeah, I've used Gong a little bit before, but your experience probably trumps my level of experience with it. You said that you used it to find common trends and objections. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So in this solution, you can actually define specific themes or keywords or areas in the call which you would like to highlight, and you get daily or weekly alerts about calls that had these things. So whenever there is like a pricing objection, or whenever a specific competitor comes up frequently in the calls, you actually get alerts of all these occurrences in the call, and you don't have to listen to the whole call. You just listen to these specific sections where the competitor was mentioned or a pricing objection was raised. So it helps you to get, this kind of like, you can spend 2 hours a week listening to the highlights of the calls, or 1 hour a week listening to these highlights. And it gives a lot of information that's otherwise really hard to collect from everyone in the team.
Yeah, it's particularly interesting to me because ThunderAct does very similar things, but across all things besides just recorded phone calls. So I had to inquire a little bit more.
Yeah. By the way, we're also looking at ThunderAct as a potential future project, and I think the value is definitely. I mean, it definitely gives great value. So yeah, for sure.
So let's switch over to the customer success side. So what are some of the most important indicators that you guys have to know whether or not a customer is going to be successful or not?
Yeah, so this one is a bit tricky. I mean, originally the way we're looking at it is we're focusing mostly on product usage data. So we're just looking at different metrics around, how many tests are running with our platforms, how often they're running it, is it integrated in their CI system, and we're still relying on this as the primary indicator. But what we found to be challenging, especially recently when more budgets are being cut, or the companies are more strict around budgets for renewals, what we've seen is that we had few occasions. Again, it didn't happen a lot, but it happened in 1 or 2 cases where these health indicators were looking very good. I mean, everything was green, the customer was using it, the tests were actually trending up, and things looked good. But then came renewal time, and the company had like budget cuts, and they had to decide which tools are they gonna stop using. And all of a sudden, we found that this our solution was they're not gonna renew it. And again, the reason for that, like one of the person who was the main champion left that company right before the renewal kicked in, and the executive were not fully aware of the value that they're getting from this solution. So what we're leaning towards right now is, in addition to the product metrics and the product usage, which are really important, we're also looking much more at the level of engagement we have with the company, like how many levels of people are we engaged with, especially for the tier 1 and tier 2 customers. So how many levels are we engaged with? Who is coming to the to the periodic review team that our customer success is doing with them? What goals and metrics do we define in each quarterly review or annual review we have with the customer, and how well we help them meet these goals? And for all the tier 1 and tier 2 customers, we want to make sure that in addition to the product metrics, we also have these parameters that are green. Otherwise, it just becomes a big risk.
Okay. So, I mean, in your answer to that question, you alluded to at least one of the challenges that you're facing during the shutdown is that people are making budget cuts and they're having to prioritize which pieces of software they're going to renew and keep on the books. Besides that, what other challenges have you guys faced?
Yeah, so when this whole coronavirus thing started like popping up at the beginning of the year, I mean, it was just when we finished planning the year, like, planning 2020, and started thinking about, like 2021, looking at, cash flow, burn, or like revenue forecast and everything. And this was a big project and a big effort, and we felt like, okay, we're ready to go. We're super excited about the year. We have, like really good outlook. And then all of a sudden this hit, and we started, meeting with our board, meeting with our some of our consultants, and everyone was saying, hey, it's going to be, a big recession, potentially even bigger than what we had in 2008. So we started replanning everything. I mean, we took different scenarios and we planned for, we kept the original plan as kind of like the reference point, but we also created 2 additional plans for lower revenues and potentially also higher churn. And we also wanted to make sure that we can adjust the budget accordingly. So the biggest challenge was to really find ways to cut the spending without affecting the most critical activities in the company. And we also decided to do some salary reductions, which again are always hard to do in the company. So it was definitely a challenging period, and communicating to the team, executing this plan, making sure that everyone can understand how they keep working with reduced budgets with these different constraints. Was definitely a challenge. I mean, luckily the impact so far has not been like, as we expected, and hopefully in the second half of the year, it won't hit harder, but so far it seems that, things are progressing well.
Yeah, so at least for me, there are some parts of the COVID slowdown that I found way easier than others. I expected, working remotely to have a significantly higher impact than it actually did. It turns out, business kept going, not as usual, but the world didn't stop turning like I felt like it was going to. And I didn't stop all my collaboration with colleagues just because I'm not sitting right next to them. Was there anything, besides maybe like the transition to remote that you found significantly easier than you expected?
Yeah, so the first thing, definitely, as you mentioned, we found the transition to remote to be easier than we expected. I mean, in the first few weeks, there was some hit in productivity, but after people got adjusted and the team got used to this new reality, and we're definitely seeing great productivity right now, and really minimal impact. I think the other area which we've seen, which affected less than we expected, is that actually because of this situation where like everyone are working remote and people are buying more online and all the companies are trying to go online, we actually saw much more urgency around digital transformation projects and automation projects. So companies that we spoke with before and said, we want to adopt your technology, but it's kind of like in the longer term roadmap and we're not going to start it right now, all of a sudden started getting urgency around the adoption of our solution. So we were able to actually accelerate few large enterprise deals. It usually takes longer and actually happened faster right now because companies had this urgency to move faster and to go online.
Yeah, I've felt the effects of that as well, and well, it's nice to at least have something something positive come out of that, even though we don't want to admit it. So let's talk about you personally, and less so about Applitools as a whole. So was there anything that you've struggled with more yourself as a CEO? I'm sorry, a COO of Applitools. What specific challenges have you faced on your own?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest challenge when it started and when the lockdown started was to actually find a new routine where I can stay productive. I mean, I have 3 kids at home and my wife is working full time. So finding a way to, make sure the kids are following their routine with the Zoom meetings for school or the daycare and, like dealing with all the distractions and still find ways to be productive. So I had to make a lot of adjustments, shift my day a little bit, more work during the evenings and nights. And again, I can't say that I really figured it out, but I think we found a way to at least, keep reasonable productivity. And I think right now, like it took a few weeks, but I think we got to a really good routine. And I think the same challenge was to make sure that the same is true for everyone in the team. Like we have people that have little babies that are just born, or we have some people with which didn't have the right environment to work at home. I mean, people that were sharing apartments with other people and didn't really have a quiet spot to do meetings. So we had to help some of the people on the team to make the required adjustments to be able to stay productive. I think these were kind of like the key challenges from that perspective.
Yeah. I mean, have you found making decisions to be more difficult? Like, have you felt like you've felt a little more disconnected from the company, or do you feel more in touch with the company, or how is that?
So actually, I think the decisions, actually, we accelerated a lot of the decisions, and we started, like, it was much clearer that we have to focus on the critical things and let go of some things that we would actually potentially consider in other times. But I feel like it actually narrowed the focus and helped to zoom in on the critical projects. So many of the decisions actually got accelerated during this time.
Okay. So regarding trends, I mean, one of the trends that you mentioned already was that customers that were thinking about making a digital transition or transformation suddenly had the fire lit under them in order to make that transition. Were there any other trends that you've noticed, either positive or negative, that have come up during this time?
I mean, I think this is probably the biggest trend that we've seen. I mean, one of the things that we're trying to think about, how can we make up? So we cut some of the marketing budget, and we cut some of the ad spend. So we were trying to think about creative ways, how can we make up for it? And we saw more and more companies start doing online events, and we had a pretty big chunk of budget allocated for physical conferences. So now many of these conferences turned virtual, and they still wanted to keep the same sponsorship packages. And it was kind of like a decision: okay, should we keep sponsoring these conferences now they go virtual, or should we maybe try to do our own virtual events? And we decided to focus almost all the events budget on virtual events that we produce instead of sponsoring other virtual events. And this turned to be a really positive kind of like a experience. So I think from a trend perspective, I think virtual events are bringing value. I mean, people are joining virtual events. I mean, we had we do webinars. We did webinars before, and in each of these webinars, we have a few thousand registrations. But in the online events, which were kind of like a full day events, we had one in the US with about 700 people. We have one today for Asia Pacific. We have about 500 or 600 people registered. So I think people are really hungry for online content, and this is showing up. And the other thing, which I think is also to some extent related, one of the initiatives we started last year was, we call it the Test Automation University. It was kind of like an online university for software testing, and it got some nice momentum last year. But this year, when the COVID situation kicked in, the numbers over there were booming. Like, all the traffic was doubling, sometimes tripling on a daily basis. We crossed the 50,000 students mark, and we've seen people taking much more courses. So again, these are not necessarily courses about Applitools, it's courses about different things in the industry, but it helps to elevate our brand and kind of like give people a very positive perception about the Applitools brand and drive more awareness to Applitools as part of this initiative. So I think overall, like, online events and different types of online initiatives and hackathons, we found it to be really helpful.
Okay, so let's shift. I mean, we're talking about shifting to virtual, and with virtual comes more data. So we have the ability to collect more data. Now, since we've made this transition, have you noticed your team having to rely more on that data? And have you made any changes to the types of data that you collect, how you collect it, how you interpret it, anything like that?
So, I mean, a big part of our team worked remotely before COVID. So this was not such a significant change. When we have different offices, and some people were working in the office, many people were remote. So we didn't do that many changes with that regard. I mean, we did have to do some changes in the kind of data that we use during the sales process. Like, if in the past we were used to just come to the engineering team and the engineering leaders or digital leaders and sell them the product, and they kind of like ran the whole process and approve the budget and everything. Now we've seen, especially for the enterprise deals, that all of a sudden the CFO gets involved in many deals, the finance team gets involved in many of these deals, and they speak a different language. I mean, they care about different things. They want to see the hard ROI numbers, and they want to see a really clear business outcome, which again, it's also true before. I mean, other engineering leaders and digital leaders also want to see ROI numbers, but with finance, it's much more strict and much more rigorous. So we had to collect much more data during the POC process and much more metrics on how implementing this solution will kind of like affect the overall productivity and velocity of their business, and do some extrapolation on how it's going to look like when they go into mass adoption.
Okay, so it's funny. I have a cheat sheet of a bunch of different questions that I'm planning on asking here, and you've managed to address most all of them, in addition to the questions that I've already asked you. But so there's one thing that we haven't touched on yet that I want to make sure that that I ask, and then we'll let you go. Has there been any shift or change in any partners that you guys utilize, or your relationships with those partners during this time?
Yeah, so actually this one was interesting. I mean, when we look at the partners, I mean, we generally categorize the partners to two categories. I mean, the ecosystem partners or technology partners, companies like Microsoft and Amazon and Adobe and these types of companies, and the go-to-market partners, which are resellers, distributors, companies like Accenture and Wipro and Cognizant, etc. What we've seen on the technology partners, there was kind of a very minimal change. I mean, we did more joint marketing with them on virtual events with Microsoft and with others, which was pretty effective. But everything else stayed pretty much the same. But with the system integrators, we actually saw a pretty significant shift. I mean, these companies were also trying to reinvent themselves when this corona virus hit. I mean, first of all, they had thousands, tens of thousands of heads sitting in India and other countries and helping doing staff augmentation, offshoring for companies. And now these people used to come to a secured office with VPN connection to the company and have all the permissions. Now all of a sudden they're at their home, so they had to adjust it and get to the same infrastructure going. And also a lot of companies were looking to cut on headcount, even offshoring headcount. So they had to kind of find ways to still deliver value to their customers with less resources. And this actually drove more initiatives to implement innovative tools, implement artificial intelligence, which we're focusing on, and drive innovation. So all of a sudden, some of these partners, which we kept chasing for a long time and rarely brought us an opportunity here and there, all of a sudden started bringing us to almost each and every opportunity that they go for and each and every RFI. So this drove a positive change with some of these partners.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's nice that we are able to generate any positive change in a time like this. Well, is there anything else that you would like to add or address to anybody before we open up any questions?
No, I mean, actually, if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Okay. Well, if anyone has any questions, just drop them in the chat. We'll just give you a minute.
Moshe, thank you very, very much. This was really fascinating. And I know I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience did as well. So thank you so much for your time. And Michael, thank you for hosting this. This was really, really great and probably refreshing to hear someone else but me. So thank you, Moshe. And that was Moshe from Applitools. And we will be back in 7 more minutes for the session.
There is one question from Ashley. Do you want me to address it?
Yeah, what would be your #1 tip for companies planning out the rest of the year virtually?
So I think the #1 tip when it comes to online events, I mean, just understand the ecosystem of your business. Where your target audience is spending time. LinkedIn groups, following specific specific people on Twitter. Reading specific blogs, and focus on spending your marketing budget on these channels. I mean, if you have a LinkedIn group of a few thousand members that is speaking about customer success, for example, and you're trying to sell to customer success teams, I mean, reach out to these the owners of these LinkedIn groups, offer them a sponsorship to publish some of your content, publish some of your events, and use this as a way to drive registration to your event and increase your database. And initially, it might be expensive to to spin up these initiatives. But after you do it, I mean, when people register to your events, they become part of your database. And then when you do more events, I mean, you have to spend less, and you start kind of like getting the value of your larger database. I think just understand all the places where your audience is spending time, and spend money there. And people there are a lot of people that have a large number of Twitter followers and are willing to promote you for a specific sponsorship, or you can call it different ways. So I think these are like kind of like a unique type of investments, and some companies are not comfortable doing these types of investment, but I found it to be really cost effective.
All right, Ashley says she loves it. All right. Well, I think that's all that we've got for now.